Chapter 1555. Partners in crime. The ketch was drifting in the current, slowly being pulled toward the icy shore. Cassie remained motionless on the helmsman's bench, her hand resting on the steering oar's handle. Her unseeing gaze was distant. After a while she sighed. "I guess I should explain it from the start." A crooked smile appeared on Sonny's face. "That would certainly be nice, considering that you have arranged for this moment for that exact purpose." By then, he had plenty of time to realize that Cassie had manipulated the events of the previous days for the exact purpose of having this conversation with Sonny away from the ears of their companions. Why? What did she want to achieve? And why now, just before the final battle of this nightmare? Did they have to talk alone because the Mad Prince in Torment had orchestrated this entire cycle of the Great River alone? He was about to find out. Sonny felt a lot of pressure drain from his heart, knowing that Torment was gone and the only obstacle between the cohort and salvation was the harrowing but mindless first seeker. But at the same time, he was on edge because of what was happening between him and Cassie. The ease with which she was revealing her secrets was ominous. The blind girl remained silent for a moment, then picked up the guiding light and rested it on her shoulder, the light of the radiant crystal affixed to its top illuminating her face. "I did not lie when I said that I only saw darkness in my visions after entering the nightmare." Sonny shifted slightly. Why is she bringing that up? Cassie smiled. However, that was not because of the nature of the tomb of Ariel itself. Rather, my inability to perceive its secrets was engineered by Torment. My abilities were suppressed with the help of a sorcerous item. You should be able to guess what that item was. Sonny's eyes narrowed. An image appeared in his memory, the image of golden shackles wrapped around Cassie's hands, connected by a golden chain. The chain she had broken before leaving Fallen Grace. The blind girl nodded. Yes, those shackles were worn by Dusk, and therefore they were on my wrists the moment I entered the nightmare. Dusk had not created the suppression enchantment, though. Instead, it was Torment. She had countless years to prepare for my eventual return after all. Sonny raised an eyebrow, his gaze turning grim. "Why break them then?" Cassie shrugged. "Because I needed to in order to survive what was to come. Alethia's island, Twilight. We would not have made it out alive if my powers were crippled, so it was worth the risk. Plus, the visions come to me in my dreams, and your shadow nightmare has been destroying my dreams one after another, so I was safe from learning the truth of the estuary as long as we were together." She paused for a moment and continued, her voice growing quieter. "My past self, one who was destined to become Torment, did not have that luxury, though. In her own cycle, she managed to create the suppression enchantment to protect herself from the truth. But she knew that the Mad Prince was coming for her, and she could not escape him." A strange smile appeared on her face. Then again, she wasn't planning to. She did, however, create several countermeasures to achieve her goals even after her soul and sanity were consumed by corruption. Cassie pointed at the silent echo sitting by her side. "This echo is not very powerful, you see, because most of Torment's power simply cannot be used by an echo. Her power has to do with memories, with remembering and forgetting, something that echoes aren't capable of. So she put restrictions into her own mind, turning herself into a broken person who acted according to a set of predetermined choices. Almost as if creating a crude, miniature version of fate." She shook her head. Of course, that alone was not enough to escape the madness of corruption. No matter how well she prepared, the defilement was going to turn her into a being who could not be controlled. Unless, of course, she received help from the Mad Prince, who was able to preserve a fragment of his humanity thanks to that loathsome wraith of yours. With his help, she could truly turn her defiled self into an instrument of her will. Sonny shifted slightly and asked, his voice full of doubt, And how did they accomplish that? How could a defiled saint be controlled? Cassie faced him and remained silent for a few moments, then smiled. How else? By making the Dread Lord use his authority against her, of course. The Mad Prince added fuel to the paranoia the Tyrant of Verge felt toward Torment, and then put the idea of what commands to give her into his mind. Therefore, two of the plagues became capable of resisting their vile natures to a degree, and thus Torment and the Mad Prince became perfect conspirators. She moved the steering oar slightly, turning the ketch so that its bow faced the nearing shore of the ice island. After the plagues reached the estuary and used it to invade the next cycle of the great river, the two of them meticulously prepared the playing field for the arrival of us, the new challengers. Eventually, the Mad Prince trapped two of the plagues on Alethia's island, and two more in Twilight. Then, he finished the key of the estuary and entered the source, becoming you. Sunny looked at her somberly, then shifted his gaze and glanced at the echo of Torment. Why didn't Torment do the same then? Why remain and come into contact with you? Why attack you, forcing you to kill her? Cassie's expression turned cold. She lingered for a while, then smiled darkly. The Mad Prince had to enter the source to make sure that you possess the key of the estuary at the start of the nightmare, thus protecting you from the truth harbored by the sin of Solace. Perhaps he could have created a memory that contained both the suppression enchantment and the enchantment that would allow it to be transferred to me at the start of the cycle. But one of the two had to stay behind. Shadows suddenly danced across Cassie's beautiful face as she lowered the guiding light. That was because Torment had a message to deliver to me so that her wish could be fulfilled, and that message could only be delivered face to face. She took a deep breath. So, she infiltrated Fallen Grace and modified the shackles that bound Dusk. She also wrote an accord of what happened in the previous cycles and left it for me to read. Finally, she crawled into the Temple of Dusk and met me, delivering the message. Cassie's voice turned cold, and her expression became ruthless. However, she was still a defiled, and unlike the Mad Prince, she did not have a whisper of Ariel to keep her from losing all of her humanity. All she had was a cruel weave of restrictions and commands to push her toward the desired outcome, and that weave was not flawless. She looked at Sunny without any humor in her eyes. So, after completing the mission of delivering her message to me, she instantly attempted to consume me. She was still being held back by the authority of the Dread Lord, though, and so, she died by my hand instead. There was silence for a while. The ketch reached the shore of the icy island and scraped against it, coming to a stop. Sunny stared at Cassie, his thoughts in turmoil. So she knew everything all along. It took him a long time to learn the truth about the great river, the source and the estuary, the 6 plagues and their connection to the members of the cohort, and the purpose behind the schemes of the Mad Prince. Of the Mad Prince and Torment, to be precise. The two defiled horrors were partners in crime in more than one sense. Even though Torment was barely a living being, from what Cassie had told him, her mind shattered and her will chained by the restrictions of her own creation and the authority of the Dread Lord. In a sense, Sunny had been right. The Mad Prince had indeed a plan in place to remove Torment from the cohort's path. She had been used and discarded, sent to be slaughtered by Cassie in Fallen Grace. He did not doubt for a moment that the outcome of their fight had been calculated by the vile madman in advance. The only thing he was not sure about was if Torment knew about it and went to her death willingly, or at least as much as she had been capable of exercising her broken will. There were numerous questions on his mind, but 2 of them were the most important. What was the message Torment had to deliver? And why had Cassie not shared her knowledge with the cohort? The answer to the second question should be evident by now. Whether Cassie intended to or not, she had let it slip. When she told him about the version of her from the previous cycle, the one that had eventually become Torment. turned into a defiled abomination by the previous version of him. She said that the Cassie of the past had never intended to escape the defilement, that she had known what the future Mad Prince was planning, and allowed herself to be infected with the defilement by him despite that. Which meant that Cassie had been scheming long before that happened, that she had needed to be defiled, for some reason, before escaping corruption come the next cycle. He gritted his teeth. So, you knew all along and kept quiet. You did not share any of that knowledge with us, acting surprised when we learned the dreadful truths of this nightmare. Did you not think, at least once, that maybe it would be good for us to know what we were getting ourselves into before plunging ourselves into the sea of danger and suffering? Cassie faced him calmly. Why? Because sharing my knowledge has worked so well in the past. Sure, Sonny. You of all people should know how dangerous knowledge is, what knowing something that you aren't supposed to know can do, and what revealing secrets can destroy. She turned away. What would have changed if I told you? We would have still needed to go to Alethia's island. We would have still needed to go to Twilight. Sure, we could have prepared better for what was waiting for us ahead, but I am not omniscient. I only know that much. Would it have made a difference? Or would it have just made us complacent and arrogant, leading to our deaths? The blind girl smiled sadly. Most of all, would any of our preparations have been more thorough than what the Mad Prince in torment had already prepared for us? She shook her head. So I think I will keep my knowledge to myself. That way, at least, I won't be blamed for the decisions the rest of you make, when you make them. Sonny laughed bitterly and stared at her, his eyes full of dark amusement. Oh, now you decide to keep your knowledge to yourself. Good, good. It's just a pity that you couldn't do the same on the Forgotten Shore before turning me into a damned slave. He had not planned to bring the distant past up, but hearing Cassie say those words, all of the resentment he had buried in his heart suddenly flooded to the surface. Perhaps it was not unexpected, though. All this time, Sonny had hated the fact that he was made a slave by Nephis. Nephis had not used that power against him, so that hatred of his was more of an abstract thing, born from the fear of what could potentially happen. Not that it made it invalid. Recently, however, the situation had changed. The harm Shadow Bond was doing him had turned from abstract to very real. Its existence was the thing that stood between him and Nephis like an impregnable wall, making the idea of them having a future together seem beyond reach. That was what Cassie had taken from him as well. Cassie turned sharply and stared at him, her mask of composure barely holding. You know why I did what I did. I was young and naive back then, stupid and helpless. I know better now. Sonny raised his hands and clapped them, applauding her. Good for you, really. What stunning growth, but... He lingered for a few moments, and then said through gritted teeth, but you know, you never even apologized for taking my freedom away, so I guess you aren't that burdened by having done that. She flinched. The cold winds rose, making the sails of the ketch flutter. Nevertheless, it stayed in place, its bow lodged into the icy shore of the desolate land. Cassie remained silent for a while. Then she said, her voice trembling slightly, but I did apologize. Sonny raised an eyebrow. Somehow, I don't remember, and I would have remembered something like that. When did you ever apologize for what you had done to me? The blind girl hesitated for a few moments, and then said quietly, it was right after we escaped from the Soul Devourer, when we were sailing across the dark sea on the boat Nephis made. Stunned, Sonny stared at her for a few moments. Then his face was twisted by a grimace of anger. What the hell did you say? You apologized in advance, almost an entire year before we stormed the Crimson Spire. What kind of crap is that? Does it make sense in that twisted little head of yours? Subjected to his anger, Cassie lowered her head. Then, however, a cold expression appeared on her face. She looked up, facing him again. Sure, yes, Sonny, you're right. That was cowardly of me. A fragile smile appeared on her face. But what is the worth of saying sorry? It wouldn't have changed anything. Words are worthless. If someone is truly sorry, they should express it through their actions, don't you think? Sonny chuckled. And what have you done to redeem your mistake? Huh, what can you even do? It can't be undone. Cassie remained silent for a while, and then suddenly pierced him with a fierce gaze. Even though he knew that she could not see, at that moment, Sonny did not remember it. Her voice was a little hoarse when she spoke. Says who? He was slightly taken aback. Glancing at her with a frown, Sonny raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Cassie smiled bitterly. Who says that it can't be undone? Who says that it's impossible? She shook her head. So what if it's impossible? I'll do it anyway. Sonny stared at her in bewilderment. What the hell are you talking about? Cassie raised her hands and rubbed her wrists, where the golden shackles had once been. What else? I am talking about breaking fate, Sonny. Wasn't that what you wanted to do, too? Wasn't that your entire goal, too? I wish to break fate as well. She lowered her head for a moment, then said quietly, everything I've done, everything I've endured, it was all for this moment. It's so impossibly hard to break fate. No matter how fiercely you attack it, it strikes back with 10 times the might. My true name, Song of the Fallen, it means that I am destined to witness the fates of others and carry the memories of them long after they are gone. To be a witness, powerless to change what I see. Well, I refuse. I don't want a fate like that at all. Then a faint smile bloomed on her delicate face. It is impossible to break fate with a strike, but what about 1,000 strikes? 10,000 strikes? If each one of them damages its tapestry a little bit, misaligns its strings by a tiny fraction, obstructs its flow by a minuscule amount, then, put together, they can tear fate apart. One just needs a sharp enough weapon. Cassie faced Sonny, allowing him to look her in the eye. I intend to give you a chance to become such a weapon, Sonny. Suddenly, he felt a chill run down his spine. The bad premonition he had felt was back, making him tense with fright. What did you do? What did you do, Cassie? She shrugged. What did I do? This and that. Some of it was easy and some of it was hard. All of it, though, all of it was almost unbearable, is unbearable, but not for long now. Because I'm about to be free of that burden. Sonny stared at her, his eyes slowly widening. Suddenly, he saw many of Cassie's actions in a new light. And the implication of what he saw was so vast and terrifying that it made him shudder. You planned it all from the start, didn't you? She smiled softly, then shook her head. Not all of it. It's impossible to plan for all of it. I might know a lot and see a lot, but I am not omniscient, Sonny. The trick, though, is to plan enough of it so that when the unexpected happens, it could still become a part of the plan. He looked aside, distracted by the glow of the guiding light. You've been manipulating the events of this cycle all along. That time in the drowned temple, I failed to discover the hidden compartment where the sacred relic was hidden, so you did it for me. Wait, no. As Cassie looked at him with a faint smile, Sonny paled. It started long before the nightmare. During the battle where the 7 saints came together, you manipulated the battle formation, so that I could finish off the defiled seeker of truth. He stopped talking as a shiver ran through his body. No, even before that. When had it started? When had Cassie begun to weave her grandiose plan, manipulating everyone, from the fire keepers following her to the leaders of the great clans, into doing her bidding? And powerful Oracle was indeed a terrifying existence, especially one as ambitious, but at the same time quiet and unnoticeable as Cassie had turned out to be. Finally, Sonny looked at her, utterly stunned. His expression was frozen. It was. Even saying it aloud was difficult. each word immeasurably heavy because of the weight of all the implications. It was back on the Chained Isles, when I came to you, intending to recruit you to challenge the second nightmare together. And you told me that you received a vision of us dying in the winter. You have already been planning for today, all the way back then. Sonny stared at Cassie, struggling to believe how deep the roots of her mysterious scheme went. He noted recently that the blind girl's personality changed drastically after the cruel words he had thrown at her at the underground level of the Academy's medical complex, right after the Forgotten Shore. That was when she had begun to weave her spiderweb, most likely. Looking at the young woman sitting across from him, meeting his gaze with dark and defiant pride, he felt a chill running down his spine. Which one of us is worthy of being called the heir of Weaver, even? Cassie had just as high of an affinity to fate as him, after all, if not higher. He took a deep breath, feeling stifled. Yes, it was back then. Looking back, it didn't make a lot of sense, did it? You had just been burned by blindly believing a vision of yours to catastrophic results. And yet, you seemed to not question the validity of us dying come winter, even though that vision of yours could only be called vague at best. Cassie had seen the two of them falling into a bottomless abyss, surrounded by snow. She told Sonny that they would die in the winter, but, in the end, the events of that vision happened in November, when the Night Temple was destroyed in a terrible battle between Sky Tide and St. Cormac. You already knew that it did not mean our deaths, and yet you made me think otherwise. But why? Cassie remained silent, but Sonny's eyes widened, a flash of frightening understanding illuminating his restless mind. It was because I was planning to challenge the second nightmare in the winter, but you needed me to move the plan forward and aim to reach the seed in the ivory tower by the end of autumn. What changed because I listened to your vision and adjusted the timing of the expedition? A dark, dangerous light ignited in the depths of his eyes. Sonny gasped. Because St. Cormac was away from the Night Temple until the end of autumn, which meant that he wouldn't have been able to stop Mordred from escaping his cage. Cassie shifted slightly, continued to face him without saying anything. But she did not need to. Once Sonny pulled on the thread, the tangled web of her hidden actions started to unravel itself. All he needed to do to understand all of it, or at least most of it, was to continue pulling. Remembering the horrid agony the two of them endured in the Night Temple, side by side, Sonny shuddered and felt rage fuel his veins. You knew about Mordred all along. You must have learned of his existence before he even learned of yours, when you were anchored at the Night Temple, even though neither you nor your cohort were allowed to enter the inner parts of the citadel. Later, you left for the sanctuary and then went on an expedition to reclaim a sapling of the sacred tree, knowing that I would come to you and carry the mirror shard that would allow that bastard to escape to the doorstep of his jail. Sonny and Cassie had come very close to dying in the cage of the Valor's secretive citadel, knowing that she had expected the mad prince of the great clan to escape, and for them to be embroiled in the horror that followed his release made it all seem even more disturbing. Sonny remained silent for a few moments, stunned by the ruthlessness with which Cassie had treated herself. By then, he had already been an awakened demon, and armed with the power of his divine aspect, he had a much easier time surviving the imprisonment in the Night Temple. She, however, did not possess multiple soul cores or an aspect that could augment her endurance and resilience, so Cassie had suffered much more in that cage. Shaking his head in stunned silence, he said quietly, "You wanted Mordred to escape. Why did you want him to be free?" There were all kinds of answers to this question. The most obvious one was that Cassie had needed the cohort to enter the second nightmare sooner rather than later, and do it in the company of the Prince of Nothing, as well. The very fact of his escape had put a crack in the potential relationship Sonny could have had with the great clan Valor, putting him in conflict with them at the moment when Nephi's returned to the waking world. which in turn pushed her into accepting their terms and becoming an adopted daughter of Valor. There were numerous other consequences of that single event Cassie had helped happen, spreading outward into the future. Mordred was a singular existence, so the fact that he was free to roam the two worlds had changed too much. From the events of the Second Nightmare to the conclusion of the war the great clans had waged in Antarctica. Which of these events had been planned by Cassie? Which had been mere coincidences? Which were coincidences that she had nimbly incorporated into her grand design, adapting to the changing circumstances with stunning speed? Just like she had perceived and calculated numerous futures with incredible speed, while fighting the defiled Sibyl in the drowned temple. It was impossible to tell. Cassie's design was a bit like the tapestry of fate, which she claimed to wish to destroy. The details could change or be influenced by unforeseen circumstances, but these sudden twists were only minor disturbances in the flow she willed into existence. The currents changed, but the direction of the tide always remained the same, pulling everything it touched to an unchanging conclusion. All Sonny could do was determine the points in time when Cassie had influenced the events openly, and try to glean her purpose from that. He rose from his sit and walked to the bow of the ketch, unable to remain in place. His mind was too tumultuous for that. Incredible. Mordred, you remained pretty passive in the Second Nightmare, didn't you? The only time you shared your knowledge of the future with me was to tell me that he couldn't be allowed to enter the ivory tower. Sonny hesitated for a moment, then smiled crookedly. But then, what you really wanted to achieve was not preventing him from entering the ivory tower, was it? It was making sure that he entered the ebony tower instead, and collected whatever it was that Nether had left there. By telling me that one sentence, you achieved exactly that. He felt as if the ground was disappearing from beneath his feet. What had happened to Mordred in the ebony tower? The Prince of Nothing had not shared that information completely, but he did mention that after leaving it, he was much harder to find with the help of divination. The strange, vague symbols Sonny had seen on Mordred's soul core were the result of that. Why would Cassie want the bastard to be resistant to her power? To make sure that Soul Stealer could go against Torment? Or simply to ensure that Valor would not be able to track their exile prince before the time was right? Or for something that would happen in the future? What else? What else had Cassie done, subtly manipulating the events of the past years? Was it a coincidence that the two of them had met Morgan at the academy on the day that Nephi's returned from her second nightmare? Surely, no. That was why Sonny had been there the moment she woke up, to welcome her back. Nephi's then spent a month living in his house, then announced her decision to join Valor at the ball, making him leave in anger and enlist for the Southern campaign, which was why he was present in the Antarctic Center during the battle against the remnant of the Jade Queen and received the Sin of Solace. Later, Cassie helped him escape the Endless Tunnel by sending him toward the Heart of Darkness. She also manipulated the battle against the immense horde of nightmare creatures as Morgan's advisor, making sure that Sonny was in the right place, at the right time, to deal the final blow to the fallen Titan, defiled seeker of truth, and therefore received the mirror of truth from it. Finally, she was there at the Battle of the Black Skull, without a doubt knowing what would happen. She was in the Nightmare Desert as well, eventually entering the Nightmare of the Great River with the 6 other powerful masters, Sonny, Nephi's, Mordred, Kai, Effie, and Jet. And these instances were only what Sonny could remember and had experienced personally. There was no telling how many strings Cassie had really pulled from behind the curtain, how many people she had influenced, and how many coincidences she had engineered to arrange for everything to happen in accordance with her wishes. The scale of the brilliant web she had woven was nothing short of astonishing and terrifying. Of course, it was impossible to say that she was solely responsible for how these events had happened. Fate flowed, pulling everyone with its current after all, and even if the details were to change. Sonny was pretty sure that he would have ended up in Antarctica one way or another. Nephi's would have probably ended up siding with Valor, one way or another. The chain of nightmare would have happened no matter what Cassie could have done. Song and Valor would have clashed, hiding their war on the battlefields of the southern quadrant. But that was precisely what Cassie was doing, wasn't it? Pulling on the strings of fate ever so minutely, compared to the grand scale of the inconceivable tapestry, and pushing toward her goal through these insignificant changes. One change had no meaning. Two changes had no weight as well, but 1,000, 10,000. By altering the details of countless inevitable events ever so slightly, she was creating a chain reaction of changes, which grew like an avalanche, threatening to alter the entire flow of the river of fate, the flow that was supposed to be unchangeable. Could it work? Sonny was not sure. He felt like some of the changes Cassie had caused were more important than others, though. The sin of solace and the mirror of truth, these two memories, somehow, he felt that they were the key to Cassie's intent. There was no need to explain the significance of the sin of solace. That memory, containing the whisper of the builder of the tomb, was perhaps the most important piece at play here, in the third nightmare. It was responsible for creating the Mad Prince, after all, and therefore introducing a variable into the endlessly repeating cycles of the great river. A single variable that introduced utter chaos to the entire system. The mirror of truth was also very significant, not only because its runes described a conversation between Weaver and Ariel, but also because it was the sole instrument that could allow someone to replicate Neph's longing, ability, thus making them immune to corruption for a short period of time. The first seeker was a vast source of corruption, which Alethea had been plagued by after learning the truth of the estuary. Sonny did not need to think long to understand how important the mirror of truth was. Still, none of it really explained what exactly Cassie was planning, and what she meant by saying that Sonny could become a weapon to destroy fate. There were a million questions on his mind, but he threw them all away, looking at the beautiful young woman with a somber expression. After a bit of silence, Sonny said hoarsely, "You don't seem to be denying any of it." Cassie shrugged. "Why should I deny it?" She faced him, then closed her eyes suddenly, letting out a long sigh. "Honestly, it's a relief. I've been keeping it all to myself for too long, so it's refreshing to be able to share it with someone, to be witnessed by someone. Maybe it's selfish, but I am glad that you finally figured it out, Sonny." His face remained motionless. "She's happy, huh?" Well, he couldn't say that he did not understand. It felt nice to be witnessed. Still, Sonny looked at Cassie with a dark expression and asked, his tone devoid of any emotion. "Well then, tell me, Cassie, what is it that you want? How exactly are you planning to break fate? What is the answer?" She lingered for a moment and then smiled faintly. "Simple, really, it's—" Cassie faced him and finished, her calm voice full of cold, confident determination. "It's the well of wishes, the well of wishes." Sonny stared at Cassie with an incredulous expression, struggling to understand what her words meant. What is she talking? Then his face changed slightly, a hint of confusion and ridicule appearing in his eyes. The children's story, the fairy tale about a magical well that grants the most precious wish of anyone who reaches it. Are you out of your mind?" Sonny took a step back, barely avoiding falling out of the ketch. His mind was full of bewilderment and disbelief. Come on, you can't possibly be serious. You don't believe that it's true, do you?" That was the fairy tale Anink had told him, not long before her death. Sonny remembered it well, but he had never expected to hear Cassie, someone so smart and pragmatic, put her hopes in a children's story about a magic well. The blind seer, however, did not seem affected by his ridiculing tone. She faced Sonny calmly, her face somber. After a while, Cassie gritted her teeth and said, her voice steady. It might not be true for anyone else, but it's true for you, Sonny. If you reach the estuary, your wish to be free will come true. Free of your bond, free to live your life the way you want, free of fate itself. She lingered for a moment, then rose to her feet too and walked closer, stopping a mere step away from him. But, Sonny, you can't have both. You can reach the estuary from here, but once the nightmare is over, your chance will be gone. The moment Nephi's destroys the first seeker, your chance would have slipped away. She smiled bitterly and raised the guiding light, offering it to him. That was what you were truly angry about, wasn't it? That I took the choice away from you. Cassie pushed the sacred relic into his hands and took a step back. Well, here it is. Instead of an empty apology, I am giving the choice back to you. You can leave and rush to the estuary. The guiding light will show you the way through the mists of the source as long as you don't give another true name to it. Once you reach the estuary, use the mirror of truth and push to its heart. There, you will find your freedom. She turned away, lingered for a moment, and then added in a quiet voice, but I hope that you make a different choice, that you will stay with us despite everything. Nephi's, I, and the others, are we so terrible? Is it really that unbearable to share a bond if it's based on trust? I think you know by now that it's not. What is unbearable is not having been given a choice about forming that bond. And now, even though the connection between you and her will remain the same, it will be there because you have chosen for it to exist. So, you decide. That right is yours again. Sonny stared at her silently, entirely shaken. His mind felt empty, as if all thoughts had been banished from it by this sudden revelation. No, wait a minute. What do you mean it's true for me? I can get rid of Shadow Bond if I reach the estuary. How? What is in there at its heart? Cassie frowned a little, then shook her head. I don't know exactly. What I do know, without a shadow of a doubt, is that my words are true. If you reach the very heart of the estuary before the nightmare ends, you will become free from fate. You will be fateless. The strings that hold you like a puppet will set you free, and your connection to Nephi's will be broken as a result. I saw it, and Torment saw it as well. He frowned. Preposterous. Plus, doesn't it sound exactly like what killed Nephi's the last time? The mad prince he was obsessed with reaching the estuary. Suddenly, his eyes widened. He thought he understood now why his versions from the previous cycles had all ended up entering the source in search of the estuary. If there was indeed a way to break free from the cruel grasp of fate that had been hidden at the heart of the Black Pyramid by the demon of dread, then Sonny, obsessed with regaining his freedom as he was, would have given his all to find it. The actions performed by all his previous selves only served to give credence to what Cassie had said. But that was also why Nephi's had died in the cycle that birthed the Mad Prince. The blind girl, however, shook her head. The Mad Prince had entered the estuary in search of his freedom, but failed to resist the defilement and became corrupted instead. Thus, the endless cycles continued. This cycle, though, was engineered by Torment and him specifically to make sure that all members of the cohort survive. Whether you find the estuary or not, there are mere days left before Nephi storms Verge and kills the first seeker. The end is already inevitable. Sonny raised a trembling hand and rubbed his face, dazed. But how can I leave? Verge the first seeker. Won't the cohort need me for the battle? Torment is there as well. No, wait, she's dead. Without Torment, Verge had been left without a leader. The first seeker was a harrowing force, but also a mindless one. It could not lead the creatures corrupted by its touch, which was why fallen grace had not been destroyed in all these years, most likely. The level of the threat presented by Verge was still immense, but with Neph's incorruptible soul, the most terrifying power of the first seeker had already been rendered meaningless. Cassie nodded. Sure, we can use having you at Verge. The battle will be perilous without a doubt. It will be fierce and fearsome, far beyond anything that a mundane human can imagine. But we can also manage without you. We have the memories you have created. After all, we have aspect legacies, experience battling the defiled, and means to defend ourselves from the first seeker. We even have Mordred, who wields a divine aspect just like you. The blind girl sighed. So, Sonny, you must decide. I've given the choice back to you. Now it's in your hands. With that, she took a few steps and jumped out of the ketch, landing on the icy shore. The echo of torment dissolved into a whirlwind of sparks, leaving Sonny alone in the boat. Cassie then turned and looked at him expectantly. Her face was both scared and hopeful. Sonny froze, not knowing what to do. Sonny stood at the deck of Anank's ketch, looking at Cassie, but not seeing anything. A storm of emotions, fragmented thoughts, and burning desires raged in him, making it hard to comprehend the true scope of what the choice presented to him was. He took a deep breath. At that moment, the sin of solace tried to distract him by saying something, but Sonny forcefully cut off the voice of the sword wraith, concentrating on the sound of waves breaking against the shore of the frozen wasteland instead. Calm down, let's think this through. So Cassie, who had turned so quiet and unassuming to almost be invisible, had been burning with an insane ambition all along. Just like Sonny, who had swore to break the chains of fate that bound him, she had been pursuing the very same goal as well. Acting behind the curtains and armed with the revelation she received, the blind seer had been subtly manipulating the events of the past years to achieve that goal, suffering in silence as she stubbornly pushed toward it, all to give Sonny back the choice she had taken from him. The extent of her machinations was both admirable and frightening, so vast and intricate as to almost be inconceivable. But it was real. Cassie had indeed managed to create a moment where at least one of them, Sonny, had an opportunity to free himself from fate. And that was much more significant than one would think. Sure, Sonny could fulfill his most ardent wish and win back his freedom, destroying the shadow bond and even his fated attribute, thus making it possible for him to live a life free of its shackles. But what Cassie wanted to achieve went far beyond that. What she wanted was to forge a weapon to resist fate, and that weapon was a single variable. Just as it had happened with the cycles of the great river, which were thrown into utter chaos by the appearance of the mad prince, the tapestry of fate would become chaotic and unpredictable with the appearance of a fateless being. The entire flow of fate would change as a result of that. Fateless was a very suitable name for what Sonny could become, should he enter the estuary and reach its innermost secret. However, while Cassie wanted to break fate, just like Sonny, in a contradictory fashion worthy of a human, she also wanted Sonny to refuse that chance and remain with her, Nephi's, and the cohort, to choose them over his desire to be free. And just like Cassie, Sonny wanted both of these things as well. Breaking fate was nice. Gaining his freedom was nice. Learning the secrets of the tomb of Ariel was a cherry on top. However, not abandoning his friends right before the decisive battle against the forces of the defilement was also nice. Choosing to remain by the side of the people he cared about and the person he loved seemed just as precious. So what was he supposed to do? Jet had once told him that there was no freedom in this world, that the only freedom there was the freedom to choose his own chains, and Sonny came to agree with her over time. By choosing to stay with the cohort, he would be choosing his own chains. In a sense, that would make him free as well. But, maybe there was no freedom in the waking world. Maybe there was no freedom in the dream realm, too. But they were currently in the tomb of Ariel, which contained an entire realm of its own. Who was to say that there was no freedom in this bizarre and senseless world either? Cassie surely seemed certain that she was telling the truth, and despite everything that had happened between them, Sonny was inclined to believe her. He had been resentful of her for what she had done, and for failing to even say that she was sorry. But now he knew that instead of saying a few easy, or maybe not so easy words, the blind girl had been silently striving to redeem her mistake instead. She was trying to repent by giving the choice she had taken from him back. And now she had managed to do just that. If he wasn't satisfied even by such a show of sincerity, then what could he be satisfied with? Granted, Cassie had gone about her redemption in an incredibly extreme and possibly misguided way. She also put him in a very tough situation. Sure, the choice he had wished for so fiercely was now in his hands. But what was he supposed to do with it? It's true. One had to be careful of what they wished for. Sonny stared at Cassie for a while, then lowered his gaze and looked at the guiding light, which she had pushed into his hands. This was the message Torment had to deliver. The blind girl nodded slowly. Yes, it's easy to enter the source, but it's almost impossible to find the entrance to the estuary within the mist unless you know the way. The guiding light is now showing the way to the estuary. The message she delivered to me was the true name that can make the relic of the Sibyl's point to where you must go. He hesitated. What is the true name? The blind girl smiled helplessly. I don't know. Torment's power blocked that memory in my mind. The seal was only removed once we reached Verge, and after I used it to activate the guiding light, the memory of it was erased from my mind, as if it was never there. She hesitated for a moment. No matter to whom or to what that true name belongs to, it is incredibly powerful. Just bearing it for a few moments put a terrible strain on my mind and soul. So, if you do decide to leave us, take care once you reach the estuary. Sonny remained motionless for a while. He didn't want to abandon Nephi's, even if the cohort was more or less capable of taking Verge without his help. He simply did not want to. But if he threw all the complicated thoughts about the nature of freedom and what it meant to be free in this world out of his mind, there were only three things left. Sonny himself, Nephi's, and the connection between them. In the past, he had run away from her twice, once in the Dark City and once at the ball of the great clan Valor. Sonny didn't wish to run away from Nephi's for the third time. However, he also knew that any kind of relationship between them, at least the current them, was impossible as long as Shadow Bond existed. So, weirdly enough, by abandoning her on the shores of Verge, he would not be running away from Nephi's. Instead, he would be moving towards her. Because only by becoming free of her could Sonny be with her. He took a deep breath and then looked at Cassie. At the same time, Sonny dismissed Saint, Fiend, and Nightmare, calling them back to his soul. All six of his shadows were already with him, wrapped tightly around his body. And then the shadows along the shore moved, extending forward and pushing the ketch back into the water. I'm sorry, everyone. I guess I am a treacherous bastard after all. Sonny knew that Cassie had guided the ketch along the shore precisely to give him the opportunity to take it away. She would return to the chain breaker on foot, while he would be free to sail downstream toward the source, racing to reach the estuary and reclaim his freedom before Nephi's conquered the Nightmare. Looking back, Sonny threw one last glance at the blind girl, who was standing forlornly on the icy shore, summoned a certain memory and shouted, "Cassie!" She turned, hearing the sound of his voice. Sonny smiled darkly. "Let's do it." He clenched his fist and raised it into the air. "Let's break fate." The ketch flew on the currents of the great river, circling the ice wasteland. Sonny did not have the enchanted staff to summon the wind, and he had not been able to master the sorcery of names like Nephi's. But he had the crown of twilight, and with it, the water itself responded to him. So Sonny made the river itself push the ketch forward. A strong gale blew from the future as well, and as soon as he skirted the desolate land, it filled the sails. His vessel gained speed as it rushed into the past, leaving Verge and his friends behind. There was a storm of emotions in Sunny's heart. Hope, excitement, anticipation, but also guilt, fear, and shame. What would Nephi's and the other members of the cohort think when they came back and found out that he had abandoned them? How would Cassie explain his absence? Would they be angry, shaken, and resentful of him? Would they feel betrayed? They had the right to feel that way. He had abandoned them on the eve of a perilous battle, leaving to pursue a selfish goal. Was there a more obvious betrayal than that? Imagining the faces of his friends when they learned of his departure, Sonny felt his heart ache. He broke the promise he had made after Anank's death. He broke the promise he had given to Windflower as well, and even the promise he had given himself. That made his heart ache too. But it didn't matter. Even though he was in pain because of what he had done, he would have done it again. The reward that the estuary promised, the freedom to live like he wanted to live, released from the suffocating hold fate had on him, was worth it. It was worth it 100 times over. Removing the shadow bond alone was. Sure, Sonny did not know how exactly his wish for freedom would be fulfilled in the estuary. Perhaps someone like Mordred would call out his true name, turning him into a slave once again. That was all right. Sonny felt confident in his ability to kill an enemy who would become his master. It was being bonded to someone he loved and thus could not eliminate that was the problem. Being a slave to fate. Freedom, freedom. The word tasted sweet on his tongue. And so, Sonny abandoned Nephi's and Cassie and Kai and Jet and Effie with her newborn child. Praying for their safety, he sped away from Verge toward the dawn of time. He had to hurry. The city of the Seekers lay as close to the source as they had managed to build it, but there was still a considerable distance between the icy wasteland and the mist. More than that, this part of the great river was possibly the most dangerous there was, just like the harrowing reaches of the far future. The dawn of time was where the most powerful abominations in the tomb of Ariel prowled. And even if he reached the source, it would take Sonny some time to find the entrance to the estuary. It would take time to reach its very heart as well. He had to accomplish it before the first Seeker was destroyed and the nightmare collapsed. How long would it take for Nephi's to conquer Verge? Knowing her, it wouldn't be long. Steering the ketch, Sonny gritted his teeth. One day to return from the scouting mission, 2 at most. One day to guide the cohort to Verge. They would remain there for a day or two, evaluating the situation inside the city. Then, the battle itself. Even if they have to fight through a legion of the defiled to reach the first Seeker, it won't take long. Nephi's had 7 fully saturated cores after all. She wouldn't hesitate to sacrifice 6 of them to obliterate Verge. Mordred was not far away from forming the monster core, which would allow him to create a reflection. Once that happened, his growth would accelerate exponentially, quickly turning him into an unstoppable fiend once again. Effie, Jet, and Kai were a force to be reckoned with as well. It would have been different if Nephi's did not possess an incorruptible soul. After all, even the Serpent King and his army had failed to take Verge. But since she did possess it, the nightmare would be over soon. It was a matter of days. So there was no time to waste. The ketch sailed downstream, carried by the winds and currents. The great river glowed with iridescent light, the world suffused with darkness. The silence was only broken by the sound of waves and the infuriating voice of the Sin of Solace, who seethed with hatred and whispered poison into Sonny's ear. Sonny refused to answer, though. In fact, after saying goodbye to Cassie, he had not made a single sound. His eyes were aimed at the horizon, and his face was frozen with cold determination. Soon the 7 suns rose from beneath the water. The darkness was banished, and the sky turned bright again. He let out an inaudible sigh as the image of the countless slumbering butterflies disappeared from his mind. As it was dawn, Sunny used the opportunity and summoned the shell of the onyx serpent. Hiding the catch in his maw, he rushed forward as fast as he could, and the speed granted to him by the body of the sea serpent in the water was nothing short of stunning. Keeping such an enormous shell manifested burned through a lot of essence, but the crown of twilight was supplying him with a nearly endless reserve of it. More than that, even the essence he had expended to accelerate the current was replenished. The period of dawn did not last long, and the sky soon turned azure, but Sunny had covered a great distance in that short period of time. Spitting the catch on the water, he dismissed the shell and landed on the deck again, grabbing the steering oar. His solitary journey continued. He was moving downstream, further and further into the dawn of time, approaching the point where time had not existed yet, the source. And the estuary hidden in its mist, Sunny raced to the source, afraid of the passage of time. It was ironic, really. Before the fateful conversation with Cassie, he had been tense and concerned about how the cohort would survive the battle for Verge. Now, however, he was concerned that they would destroy it too soon. He had been worried for Nephis, but now he was wary of her. Changing Star seemed like something almost inevitable, now that his fate, or lack thereof, depended on how fierce and unrelenting her assault on the monstrous First Seeker would be. Human mind was funny that way. It was colored by what one desired, making the same thing appear entirely different depending on the circumstances. And so Sunny needed to hurry. He guided the catch, pushing the currents forward with the help of the crown of twilight. The graceful boat seemed to be gliding on the water, moving with incredible speed. The shore of Verge had long disappeared from view, and there was nothing in front of him except for the vast expanse of the great river. The air itself felt different here at the dawn of time. The waters were treacherous and full of peril. Now that Cassie wasn't with him, Sunny had no way of knowing where danger lurked. So he remained as alert as possible, extending his shadow sense as far as he could. That caution saved his life on more than one occasion. The far reaches of the past, which corresponded to the very dawn of the Age of Gods, were not only full of bizarre and lethal hazards, but also of all kinds of harrowing nightmare creatures. This span of the great river was just as dangerous as the far reaches of the future, where Sunny had faced the azure serpent, the black turtle, the dark butterfly, and the countless other abominations that had almost feasted on his flesh. There were great nightmare creatures here, too, each of them vastly more powerful than Sunny was, despite all his growth. Most of them were faster than him as well, and possessed senses that reached much further than his. So Sunny was in constant danger. He couldn't even outrun these abominable monstrosities. But luckily, there was one thing at which he was superior to most, if not all of them. It was flexibility, and being able to adapt to almost any situation. When some inconceivable being rose from the depths to pull him under the water and devour him, Sunny summoned the shadows and turned into a giant butterfly, carrying the catch with his 6 long legs. When a terrifying abomination descended from the sky, he turned into the onyx serpent, hid the catch in his maw, and sought safety in the depths. There were other forms he could shape himself into as well, each helpful in its own way. Of course, maintaining the shell cost him a lot of essence, so, afraid to drain his reserves of it, Sunny mostly remained in the catch, guiding it away from potential perils by hand. Still, on that first day alone, he almost lost his life a few times. There was a moment when the water under him suddenly boiled and moved at incredible speed, threatening to overturn the boat. Sunny instantly summoned Saint, using her weight to balance the catch, but that was merely the start of the disaster. An enormous span of the great river, as far as the eye could see, instantly turned into a furious vortex. The speed of the current was so terrible that the hull of the ketch almost splintered, bombarded by powerful waves. It was pulled sideways, sliding deeper and deeper into the whirlpool. Desperate to save himself and his vessel, Sunny opened the gate of the shadow lantern and called upon the shadows, forming the shell of the dark butterfly. His vast wings moved, throwing him into the air. His 6 legs grabbed onto the ketch, lifting it from the raging water. Luckily, he was fast enough. As Sunny rose high into the air, he was able to observe the cause of the catastrophic turbulence that had turned the current of the great river into a death trap. When he did, his very soul shuddered. There was a colossal, inconceivable maw hidden beneath the waves, stretching from one horizon to another. The terrible whirlpool that had almost shattered the ketch was caused by these titanic jaws opening and sucking in an immense plain of water. An entire span of the great river disappeared into the harrowing maw of the underwater colossus, whose body mercifully remained unseen. Sunny fled into the sky, never looking back. At another time, he noticed the air far in the distance trembling as if from heat. However, as Sunny drew closer, unable to avoid the strange area, he realized that there was no heat. The air was not trembling either. Instead, there were fissures in the fabric of space itself above the current, hidden in the sunlight and almost invisible. If not for his intuition ringing alarms, Sunny might not have noticed the hidden fractures in the world at all. When he did notice them, however, and tried to glimpse what was hidden in the folds between the broken pieces of space, he saw millions of dark eyes looking back at him, full of hunger. The current was pulling the ketch right into the area of the river, plagued by the fractured space. Horrified, Sunny assumed the form of the onyx serpent and dove into the depths, hopping to hide from the gaze of the hungry abyss that hid in the fissures. However, the space was broken beneath the waves as well. Only there were no eyes there. Instead, hidden in the shattered space, there were countless corpses of dreadful nightmare creatures, all broken, twisted, and partially devoured. Diving deeper and deeper into the darkness, until the pressure was crushing enough to almost destroy the mighty shell of the sea serpent, Sunny escaped that horror as well. But there were many more to come. Some time later, Sunny saw thin lines moving in the air. Drawing closer, he saw something that resembled spiderwebs blowing in the wind, frayed and torn. The only thing was that each string of the ghostly spiderweb was many kilometers long, and there were numerous such strings, moving between the sky and the surface of the great river like tattered sails. Some of them were white, but as Sunny guided the ketch between the billowing strings, he started to encounter more and more of them that were bright red. Eventually, it was as though he was traveling through a forest of red threads. Navigating between them was not easy, but he was reluctant to come close to any of the strings, or allow the wind to bring any of them closer. Eventually, Sunny witnessed something else. Out there in front of him, far in the distance, an immense depth dweller was weakly struggling against the current, its body enveloped by several dozen of the white spiderwebs. The creature's carapace seemed impregnable, but the strange strings did not seem to care. They simply grew through it, penetrating the leviathan's body. As they did, their color slowly started to change from white to red, the redness spreading from the point of contact with the abomination's flesh along the length of the strings. Blood, they were drinking the leviathan's blood. Turning pale, Sunny gazed at the forest of vibrant red strings that surrounded him, stretching far into the sky, permeating a whole region. His fingers turned white on the steering oar of the ketch. He escaped that horror as well, and many more like it, although not unscathed. Sometimes Sunny had no choice but to fight, unleashing the full fury of the onyx serpent or his other shapes on the creatures that wanted to consume him. Some of them he managed to kill, but most of them he simply escaped after delivering several painful wounds. By the end of the day, Sunny was bloodied and exhausted. His essence was on the verge of running dry, too. But then the dusk came, and the crown of twilight replenished his dwindling reserves. After dusk came the night, though, and it was more beautiful and more harrowing. than any other night Sonny had experienced in the tomb of Ariel. By the end of it, he was barely alive. But he was alive nevertheless. Sonny did not allow his blood to flow, and his bones refused to break. Even his soul, which had received a few deep wounds when he used shadow incarnation to form his shells, was potent enough to withstand the damage without falling apart. Saint Fiend and Nightmare were beaten and battered, but alive as well. The ketch, too, survived. Even though there were new scars on its hull, one of its masts had cracked, its sails sporting signs of hasty repairs. Anank's boat was still in one piece. Throughout all of this, Sonny had not said a single word, and had not even allowed himself a single groan. Pain was his old friend. He could withstand much more than that. Well, maybe not that much more. He was exhausted, both physically and mentally. If there was one good thing about the horrors of the dawn of time, though, it was that the necessity to constantly be alert and on edge made it completely impossible for him to consider the consequences of what he had done, the fallout of breaking his promises, abandoning his friends, and leaving for the estuary instead of fighting side by side with them in Verge. I wonder what they are doing now. The scouting teams must have returned by now. Nephis and the others had already learned of his absence. They must have even had enough time to digest it, to a degree, albeit not come to terms with it. They were most probably advancing toward Verge, which meant that he did not have a lot of time left. Where is it? Where is it? He was trying to calculate how far he had traveled from the defiled city, and how that distance translated to what they had seen from the black void. From up there, it almost seemed as though the wisps of mist shrouding the source touched the walls of Verge. But from the surface of the great river, the distance between the two was nothing short of vast. Still, Sonny had been moving fast, both aboard the ketch and when summoning his shells. By all accounts, he had to be getting close. He glanced at the guiding light, which pointed directly forward, and summoned what little was left of his patience. Finally, the night was over. The 7 suns rose from beyond the horizon once again, chasing away the darkness. The waters of the great river grew dim. A soft twilight enveloped the world, and with it, a flood of essence poured into Sonny's soul. He let out a relieved sigh, summoned the dying wish, and used what little charges were left in the charm to heal the most dire of his wounds. It was then that he saw it. A wisp of mist drifted past him, disappearing into the gloom of twilight. Feeling his heart skip a beat, Sonny spun and looked forward, trying to see what was hiding beyond the horizon. The horizon was hazy. It also seemed to be drawing nearer with each moment. This is it. Both relieved and excited, Sonny called upon the waters of the great river, making the current run faster. The ketch flew forward, drawing closer and closer to the wall of mist. Soon it was surrounded by tendrils of thick fog. They flowed past the ketch, drifting above the waves. In front of him, the world turned somber and gloomy, rare rays of sunlight breaking through the veil of mist. Then the mist obscured the sky entirely, making it seem as though nothing else existed in the world. Sonny found himself in familiar surroundings. After nearly a year of wandering the dreadful expanse of the tomb of Ariel, he had finally returned to the source. Anank's ketch was floating through a world of mist. The thick fog surrounded it from all sides, suffused with somber twilight. All sounds seemed both muffled and exaggerated, echoing across the vast expanse of shrouded water. Sonny could not see very far. Even his shadow sense was dulled by the mystical mist. It was a familiar sight. Indeed, I've been here already. This was the exact same place where Sonny had found himself at the start of the nightmare. The source. Here, covered by mist, the great river flowed into itself, and the past turned into the future. He could not feel the current anymore, but it was still there, strangely jumbled and disjointed. The ketch was moving, yet Sonny could not tell in what direction it was being carried. If he allowed himself to be pulled by the invisible current and reached the edges of the source, he would be sent back to the day he had entered the tomb of Ariel, as well as to the point upstream where the person whose role he took had been at that time. No, I can't allow that to happen. Sonny did not know if he could endure another cycle of the great river. Much more importantly, the 6 plagues and the Mad Prince had broken the rules of time somehow and invaded a cycle they were not meant to exist in. He did not know if their existence had become a part of the great river by now, or if their heretical presence would be erased should a new cycle start. If it was the latter, then all the effort the Mad Prince in Torment had put into ensuring that all members of the cohort survived until the end of the nightmare would be for naught. More than that, that end was so close. Nephi's would be reaching verge soon, armed with the means of destroying the first seeker. Sonny desperately did not want to live through the horrors of the tomb of Ariel one more time, especially since the result would be hanging in a fragile balance. No, he could not allow himself to get lost in the mist and miss his opportunity to enter the estuary. Because there, at the heart of the Great Pyramid, lay the key to his shackles, his chance to gain freedom. Luckily, Cassie had made sure that he would have everything he needed to accomplish that goal. He had the guiding light to lead him to the entrance of the estuary. He had the mirror of truth to resist the defilement once he entered it. And he had the sin of solace, which had made it all possible. Speaking of the sword wraith, as soon as the mist surrounded him, the bastard had disappeared somewhere. He must not have been in the mood to talk, or simply unable to manifest within the source. Either way, Sonny did not miss the company of the loathsome apparition at all. Stay away for as long as you want. Picking up the guiding light, Sonny studied the radiant crystal that was supposed to show him the way. Its light was behaving strangely. It pointed in a certain direction, but after a few minutes of sailing through the mist, the light would suddenly change, pointing in an entirely different direction. That repeated over and over again, with the radiance of the sacred relic jumping around and shifting chaotically. It was as though the entrance to the estuary was constantly moving. No, it's not moving, I am. Sonny knew that it was true. The estuary was stationary, but space itself was unreliable in the source. It was Sonny who was being thrown around without any order, moving a few meters to one side only to find himself several kilometers to the other. It was no wonder that the seekers of truth, despite all their might and knowledge, had failed to discover the estuary before Alethea of the Nine showed up. The mysterious sorceress had even constructed her island in the image of the great river, going so far as to create her own time loop and her own sea of mist. Had it all been in order to learn how to navigate the source? Sonny did not know, but he suspected that she had not succeeded in finding the estuary by accident. How tragic it was, then, that all Alethea had found there was her own doom, unless that was exactly what she had been searching for, of course. Who knew what goals the Nine had pursued? In any case, Sonny was not someone capable of raising a flying island in the middle of a mystical whirlpool and tamming the time to make it flow endlessly in a circle. Therefore, he would have never been able to find the estuary without the guiding light. Was it how he had found it the first time as well? Or had his versions from the previous cycles come up with their own solutions? There was no point in guessing. Using the sacred relic of the Sibyls to illuminate the way, Sonny allowed the ketch to sail forward, moving the steering oar in accordance with where the radiance was pointing. There were no nightmare creatures in the source, no danger, except for the danger that the source itself presented. So, traveling through the somber mist almost felt peaceful. Sonny quickly lost his perception of time, so he did not even know how long he had been traversing the fog. It could have been an hour, a day, or an eternity. Well, maybe not an eternity. Nephi's would have obliterated the first seeker long before that. Still, he had to be getting closer. I wonder what Alethea found in the estuary. He wondered what the Mad Prince had found there, as well. What secrets had Ariel hidden in the heart of his pyramid? What was the hideous truth he couldn't bear? Why had he hidden it all the way before time, away from the gazes of the gods? One way or another, Sonny was going to find out, and break the chains of fate that bound him tightly in the process, just as he had always wished. He was growing tired of the dancing radiance of the guiding light. His hand was growing numb as it held the steering oar of Anank's ketch. Time was flowing. And then, finally, Sonny felt it. The same thing he had felt before being expelled from the source the first time. He thought that he saw two tall pillars protruding from the mist far ahead, and then the invisible current suddenly turned violent and turbulent. There was the sound of roaring water, similar to what the waterfalls of the edge sounded like, and he felt the ketch being pulled forward at incredible speed. Then there was a sense of weightlessness. And then only darkness remained. There was the sound of wind whistling in Sonny's ears. He was falling, flying through a sea of darkness, lost and disoriented, unsure of where he was. The estuary. The wind howled louder, and Sonny felt his body plummeting through it at terrible speed. Belatedly, he remembered the need to summon the dark wing and slow down his fall. Or summon the shadows and turn himself into a monstrous butterfly. Or even a crow. But it was too late for that. Dazed, he caught a glimpse of an enormous black edifice swiftly approaching him from the darkness. It was like a rough, irregularly shaped giant sphere of black stone that hovered in the void, eternal and indestructible. Strange mountains rose from its surface, hollow on the inside. It looked like a giant stone heart. Perhaps it was. A moment later, Sonny saw Anank's ketch collide against the surface of the sphere below him and shatter, fragments of wood flying to all sides. There was no time to slow down his fall. Gritting his teeth, Sonny looked at the swiftly approaching surface of the black stone. The moment his body would have been broken against it, he activated Shadow Step and dove into the shadows instead, submerging deep into their dark embrace. Hidden there safe, he remained motionless for a while. I made it. Sonny tried to calm down his feverish mind and moved up, returning to the surface. Emerging from the shadows, he stepped on the surface of the weathered stone and instantly fell, feeling gravity pulling him down. He was on a steep slope. Sonny slid down that slope, surrounded by the fragments of broken wood. Despite the sharp rocks tearing at his skin, he did not allow himself to cry out in pain. Instead, he gritted his teeth, wrapped the surrounding shadows around his hand, and turned it into the clawed hand of a shadow spawn. Twisting, Sonny struck the slope with his claws. They failed to penetrate the rugged black surface, sending sparks flying into the air. However, the friction alone slowed him down. Eventually, Sonny came to a halt at the very edge of an abyssal drop, his feet dangling above an empty black void. The pieces of Anank's ketch spilled into that void, disappearing in the darkness. He remained laying for a few moments, catching his breath, then tried to assess his surroundings. There was no light in the world. He was surrounded by darkness, with only the weathered surface of black stone separating him from the abyss. The sound of roaring water came from somewhere far, far below, turning into a barely audible whisper. It came from above him, too, and from all sides. The whispers assaulted his mind, making him dizzy. Sonny grimaced, then cautiously stood up, struggling to keep his balance on the steep slope. Finally, he looked around. So this is the estuary. The estuary was supposed to be located in a place that existed before time, and therefore before the gods had been born. So, that place was supposed to be the void. But either the spell was unable to replicate the true void, or unwilling to. Perhaps the estuary was isolated from it somehow. In any case, all Sonny could see was darkness and the surface of the vast sphere of black stone under his feet. His expression was somber. No time to waste. Leaning forward, he arduously climbed back up the slope, eventually reaching its middle point. That was where he had first fallen. Without stopping to rest, Sonny continued to climb. Cassie said that I need to get to the very heart of the estuary. This means that I probably need to somehow climb inside the sphere. Remembering the strange hollow mountains, which resembled torn Yordi, he continued to ascend the slope. Eventually, Sonny crested the top of what seemed like a tall hill and looked down. He froze, shaken by what he saw. His eyes widened, full of shock and fear. And no, how can this be? In front of him, nestled between several immense outcroppings of black stone, was a vast valley, and on the floor of that valley, shrouded by darkness, lay the remains of countless broken ships. It was a vast ship graveyard. The harrowing thing about it, though, was that each of these ships looked familiar. They were all the Chain Breaker. There in front of him, thousands of Chain Breaker lay on the black stone, broken and destroyed. Although each was destroyed in a unique manner, shattered by a terrible impact, most of them were exactly the same. Some were a little different, seemingly modified before turning into a forlorn wreck. The shape of their rams was slightly different. The tattered sails were painted in different colors. The trees growing around the central mast of these ships were dead and twisted, devoid of all life. Some of the trees, though, looked perfectly healthy and alluring, countless succulent fruits weighing their branches down. Shuddering, Sonny decided to keep as far away from those wrecks as possible. There were countless broken ships in front of him, thousands of them. And it was just in that one valley. They weren't the wrecks of an entire fleet of similar vessels. Instead, they were the same vessel, destroyed countless times. Suddenly covered in cold sweat, Sonny felt his sense of reality shaking. What does it mean? He shuddered, then began to descend into the valley. As he did, he noticed more wood fragments among the shattered ships. They were all the remains of Ananke's ketch, piled in tall hills. He did not understand. How is this possible? As Sonny felt unsure of his sanity, a derisive laughter suddenly resounded from behind him. Turning swiftly, he looked into the darkness with wide eyes. But it was just the sin of Solace. The sword wraith looked more substantial somehow. Walking out of the darkness, he looked at Sonny with contempt and smiled viciously. What? Did you think that you were the first one to make it this far? Did you think that this is the first time you betrayed your cohort and decided to seek freedom in the estuary instead? The apparition scoffed and looked at the ship graveyard, his dark eyes burning with strange glee. Fool, there were countless versions of you that had come this far. Betrayal after betrayal repeated endlessly in countless cycles. Truly, your treachery knows no bounds. Sonny remained silent, watching the sin of Solace with a somber expression. Well, that much is obvious. Of course, he was not the first version of himself to reach the estuary. There had been the Mad Prince as well. However, the next words of the sword wraith made him flinch. Oh, there were numerous Mad Princes before, too, all making schemes and striving to change something that could not be changed, the despicable bastards, paving the way for their lesser versions like you to make it to the end. Each cycle a little different, but ultimately the same. The apparition took a step forward and spat, his voice trembling with hatred. Gods, I'm so tired of this boring play. Each time you escape the defilement, you are given the choice of remaining with your allies. And each time, you choose to betray them. You really are a piece of scum, you know that. Do you know how many times you've broken your promises? How many times you've betrayed Changing Star in the name of seeking freedom? The sin of Solace laughed and gestured to the sea of broken ships. Look, lost from light. Each of these wrecks is a monument to your sins. Sunny remained silent as he looked at the broken ships, feeling a bitter emotion rise in his heart. It was a tough pill to swallow, to be disappointed in himself. But then he smiled darkly, sure knowing that he was an unreliable and treacherous, selfish person was bitter. But did it matter, really? He still did not regret his choice. More than that, he was still going to see it through. So what if all his previous selves had failed? They weren't him. He was the latest, and therefore the strongest. He wielded the accumulated legacy of all who came before, granted to him by the Mad Prince, the latest Mad Prince there had been, who remembered all the previous cycles through the sin of solace. They might have failed, but Sunny was not going to. He didn't have to be the first. He simply needed to be the last. It was impossible for him to fail, because the nightmare was already ending. By now, Nephi's must have already begun her assault on Verge. The Mad Prince, Torment, and Cassie, they had manipulated the events to make sure that the nightmare was conquered, whether with or without Sunny. So this cycle would be the last one, whether he achieved his goal or not. And he was going to achieve it. The Sin of Solace looked at him with disdain. What? You have nothing to say. Has the fear stolen your ability to speak? Sunny smiled crookedly and walked past him without saying a word. He entered the ship graveyard and moved through it, making sure to stay away from the wrecks where the sacred trees were healthy and brimming with fruit. The feeling he received from these ones was too similar, if much weaker, than what he had felt under the branches of the Soul Devourer. Peace, safety, happiness, content. Therefore, Sunny moved as far away from that feeling as he could. The Sin of Sali followed, falling silent. The Wraith's expression was full of hatred and contempt. Sunny paid him no attention. It did not take him a lot of time to travel past the ship graveyard. Beyond it was another slope, this one leading to the peak of a high mountain. If the sphere of black stone had been the unholy Titan's heart once, then the mountain would be one of the arteries. Augmented by 6 shadows, Sunny's body was brimming with strength. Even though he was exhausted after the harrowing journey to the source, he climbed the mountains without ever slowing down. The only thing he felt nervous about was not making it to the goal in time. Finally, Sunny reached the peak of the mountain. It was indeed hollow inside. In front of him was the entrance to a vast circular tunnel surrounded by tall pillars. There were stone steps leading up to the maw of the tunnel, clearly man-made. Or rather demon-made. Ariel must have shaped this entrance himself, a long time ago. Walking closer to the steps, Sunny noticed that several of them had cracked over the ages. Jagged pieces of black stone were laying on the ground. The size and shape of them were eerily familiar. They looked exactly like the jagged black rock the key of the estuary had been created from. Sunny smiled. So this is where the Mad Prince picked the base material for his memory up. Which meant that the vile madman had been to the estuary before crossing from the future into the past. He could have gained his freedom a long time ago. But was there a point in being free if it was at the cost of Nef's life? For the Mad Prince, it was not. That was why he had returned to the great river without breaking the chains of fate. And that was why he had scratched numerous demented runes into the piece of flotsam drifting in the mist of the source, all saying the same thing. Be careful of what you wish for. The Mad Prince had regretted finding the Well of Wishes. Sunny, however, would not. Taking a deep breath, he summoned the Mirror of Truth and looked at its polished surface. There, a reflection of Nephi's was caught, looking just like she had on the carapace of the black turtle. Sunny had not used the mirror during the last revolution of the Alethia's Island's loop, and so it was in pristine condition. He looked at Nef's reflection for a while, then held the heavy mirror tightly and stepped into the grandiose tunnel, walking into its darkness. Entering the heart of the tomb of Ariel. He walked forward for a while, not seeing anything particular. He couldn't even determine the direction in which the tunnel led. Its floor was supposed to be sloping downward, but it felt flat, stretching endlessly forward. Slowly, the walls of the tunnel expanded, and its ceiling disappeared from view. Sonny found himself walking between two perfectly flat plains of black stone, surrounded by darkness. And there, in the darkness, harrowing runes were carved into the stone, dancing madly. As soon as Sonny caught sight of these runes, he immediately activated the enchantment of the Mirror of Truth. Sonny had only caught a glimpse of the runes, but it was enough to send him into a state of utter terror. Before even having time to think, he shut his eyes tightly and activated the enchantment of the Mirror of Truth, borrowing Nef's longing ability, thus making his soul incorruptible for a while. And it was just in time, because simply being close to the runes threatened to make corruption bloom in his soul. Arg! He groaned mentally while keeping his mouth shut. The pain was almost unbearable. It was a familiar kind of terror, revulsion and pain as well, because Sonny had recognized the shape of those runes. There were two types of runes that the spell refused to translate. One had to do with the type of beings it simply called the unknown, the primordial beings of the eternal, ever-changing void. The other had to do with the singular being that it similarly called the unknown, the mysterious progenitor of the seven demons, which might have been one of the void creatures, or might not have been. The latter runes were hard to look at, causing the head of the person to split with ache, and their mind to become dizzy. It were the former runes, though, that were truly sinister, making the unfortunate person witnessing them feel terror and revulsion. Inscribed on the walls of the tunnel were such runes, a great number of them. The walls of the tunnel, which seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions, were littered with them, with barely any empty spaces left between the harrowing symbols. Sonny gulped for air. This is the source of the defilement. Now that he thought about it, it made sense. The dreadful runes described the void beings, and he had learned by now that corruption was the influence of the void, seeping through the walls of existence that caged it. Therefore, knowledge of the void was the source of corruption as well. And that was what Ariel, that madman, had inscribed on the walls of the estuary. The stories of the void, the knowledge about it, and the true names of the harrowing beings that dwelled within its ever-changing depths, imprisoned by the gods. He was sure of it. That was what Alethea had found, most likely, and what had turned her into the source of the defilement, which was merely knowledge that could be shared and transferred, thus turning this form of corruption into an unstoppable infection. Knowledge of the void, and of the true names of those beings whose names could not be known, let alone uttered aloud. That was why the spell refused to translate the harrowing runes, not because it wanted to keep its secrets for itself, but simply because being able to read them would be the end of anyone who did. Not just reading, as well, merely being in the presence of these runes was harmful. It was already painful and dangerous to glimpse a few of them, as Sonny had done a few times in his life, for example, when reading the descriptions of the drop of Shadow God's blood and the drop of Weaver's blood. If the spell had translated those runes for him, those descriptions would have probably gone something like that. Before, there was only boundless, eternal void. From that dark abyss, the creatures of the void were born. Just like chaos itself, they were endless and everlasting, vast and forever changing. Or, the loathsome thieving bird was hated both by the gods and the creatures of chaos. However, it only cared about shiny things. Enamored by Weaver's beautiful eyes, it stole one of them on a dark, starless night. Impatient, the vile creature looked at its bounty while still in flight. However, when it saw the reflection of the void forever frozen in the depths of Weaver's pupil, it went mad and screamed, dropping the eye on the mortal realm below. All that was left in its greedy beak was one drop of pure, golden ichor. Witnessing those few runes, which merely named the void and the type of beings born from it, had almost made him faint. Here in the estuary, though, there were numerous ghastly runes carved into the stone, not only mentioning the void and the chaos beings, but also describing them in detail and calling them by their true names. Therefore, even though Sonny had only caught a glimpse of the runes, unable to read them, that alone put him at risk of becoming corrupted. Remaining near them in the endless tunnel was going to make seeds of corruption bloom in his soul as well. So, if he remained here at the time the mirror of truth crumbled into dust, he would become defiled. He would become the Mad Prince again. Running his fingers over the surface of the enchanted mirror, he could already feel a few thin cracks in it. For a moment, Sonny considered turning around. But then, a mocking voice came from the darkness. "Why don't you open your eyes?" Hearing the sin of solace made him remember why was it that he had come to the estuary, and what was at stake. His freedom. Gritting his teeth, Sonny suppressed the terror and the agony he felt from being close to the harrowing runes and took a step forward. Then he took another step. And then another. Even though each of them was so hard that he wanted to fall and shriek in pain, he remained silent and persisted. 3 steps turned into 3 dozen, and then into 300. Sonny continued to walk through the dark tunnel, keeping his eyes closed. His shadows were wrapped tightly around his body, unable to see anything. Saint, fiend, and nightmare were kept safely within his soul, unable to witness the dreadful secrets of the void. Enduring the nauseating fear and torturous pain, he kept going. And hoping that he would reach the end of the tunnel before the mirror of truth reached its limit. I am starting to rethink the value of curiosity. Even subjected to the horror of the knowledge of the void, which could quite literally turn Sonny into a nightmare creature, he still felt a strange impulse to open his eyes and try to glean the secrets left in the estuary by the demon of dread. It was such a tantalizing mystery, after all. The void, the ineffable beings that dwelled in it, and how the gods were born from them, only to wage war on the very existence that had given shape to their divinity. It was a bit like the compulsion to jump that some people felt while standing near the edge of a tall cliff. Of course, taking that leap would mean the death of them, and opening his eyes would mean the end of Sonny. So he kept them shut and kept walking. At first, each step felt as if he was trying to move a mountain, but slowly, tortuously, he grew accustomed to the suffocating pressure of the ghastly runes, not to the point of being comfortable around them, but at least enough so to increase his pace. The reason he could make even a single step, though, was the mirror of truth and the reflection of Nephi's caught in it. Without borrowing her longing ability, Sonny would have collapsed to the ground the moment the runes surrounded him, turning into a pile of something. Tentacles, maybe, or bone blades. Then again, the Mad Prince had looked pretty human-like, so perhaps he would have retained his general appearance, with only his soul becoming consumed by corruption. That would have made Sonny a fallen terror, which was the same rank and class that the Crimson Terror of the Forgotten Shore had possessed. The comparison made him feel not exactly nostalgic, but definitely contemplative. Things have changed a lot, haven't they? Distracting himself from the horror that surrounded him, Sonny continued to walk forward. Dread, absolute dread. What else had he expected to find in the heart of the tomb of Ariel? And it was not even the real thing. Sonny shuddered to imagine how much more harrowing the true estuary was. What madman would want to try entering its dreadful halls? And somehow, the key to his freedom was still waiting for him, somewhere ahead. What could grant him freedom in this God-forsaken place? Sonny did not know, but he was determined to grasp it with both hands. The sin of solace kept quiet, and so did he. Time passed agonizingly slowly, but also inconceivably fast. In fact, Sunny had lost all sense of the passage of time the moment he entered the source, so he had no idea how much of it was flowing by. Nephi's was somewhere out there, either preparing to fight or already fighting the hordes of the defiled abominations. Faster, I have to walk faster. Gritting his teeth, Sunny did just that. Nothing changed for a while, with his mind still being ravaged by the presence of the revolting runes. But then, a subtle sound reached his ears. It was the tranquil murmur of water licking a stone shore. Feeling a spark of hope ignite in his heart, Sunny touched the surface of the mirror of truth, feeling cold sweat rolling down his back when he realized that it was almost entirely covered by cracks now. The miraculous memory was going to shatter very soon. But he was still so far away. Sunny could not risk separating his shadows from himself, or turning into a swift shadow and gliding forward. The last thing he wanted was to expose his soul to more pain. Fainting in convulsions would be the end of him, so he simply took a deep breath and forced his dazed body into a run instead. The mirror of truth kept cracking beneath his fingers. And then those cracks connected together, producing a quiet but deafening sound. The miraculous mirror shattered and fell apart, the sharp shards dissipating into a whirlwind of sparks. He heard the spell whisper, "Your memory has been destroyed." At the same time, Sunny put his foot forward and felt emptiness beneath it. Losing his balance, he fell down and rolled on sharp rocks, quickly becoming covered in bruises. Thankfully, a few moments later, the pressure of the ghastly runes dissipated, and he was able to take a deep breath. Sliding down a sharp stone slope felt infinitely less torturous than being surrounded by the horrid writing of Ariel, the demon of dread. Nevertheless, Sunny lingered for a few more seconds before opening his eyes. His body had indeed rolled down another steep slope, this one leading to a vast and calm lake, or maybe a sea, or an ocean. Sunny could not see the end of it, so he did not know its size. All he knew was that the water was shrouded in darkness and tranquil, reminding him of the peaceful lightlessness of his own soul. Behind him, the entrance to the tunnel towered like an infinite vertical wound in the mass of black stone. The ceiling of the colossal cavern he had found himself in could not be seen, if there even was one. Taking a deep breath, Sunny stared at the tranquil lake of dark water with a resentful expression. Water gods, why does it have to be water again? Sunny had never encountered a deep body of water that did not hide some terrifying abomination. Hopefully, this time would be different. He thought that, but still decided against diving into the lake. Instead, he used the crown of twilight and stepped on the surface of the water instead, walking across it as if it was solid ground. The surface of the water supported him, barely wetting his dainty silk shoes. Sunny had already experienced walking on water, running on water, and even fighting on water, so this was nothing new to him. Nevertheless, the quiet lake that was hidden deep within the heart of the tomb of Ariel, at the estuary of the great river, made a sense of wonder bloom in his heart. Can this, perhaps, be the well of wishes? Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.